the Fleming Woods cluster home development was a great example of where we as residents, particularly the Marlboro community, was assured that that was not going to cause more flooding, was not going to be a problem, and that sort of thing. And then found out, after it was built, it has been more of a problem. And I don't think that's new to anybody, but you can see where, as residents, we're greatly worried about our neighbors, about ourselves. Water's getting into our yards, it's getting into our streets, and it's getting into some people's homes. And so it's really become a really big issue for us. So we decided what we would do is reach out to somebody. Franny Henty, who's from Laurel Park, was able to get in touch with Harriet Festing, who is from Anthropocene Alliance. They have a thing called the Higher Ground Initiative, and that's the largest flooding network in the country. So we reached out to this national organization to say, do you have anybody who we could ask to do this kind of a study for us to see what's going to happen after these two new developments come in, and look at their stormwater plans and tell us what the impact might be on our community. Harriet sent us to Thriving Earth, and Aaron from Thriving Earth had the meeting the other day, last week, with the town of James Island. And Aaron put us in touch with Steve Emmerman. Dr. Emmerman is a stormwater specialist, and he's going to give you his own credentials. But we really did ask him to say, what is going to be the implication of having these two new developments in our community. So at this point, Dr. Emmerman, if you would go ahead and sort of give us a little rundown on what you were able to do, that would be great.
Unmute. Okay, so let me make sure you can see my PowerPoint. Okay.
Yes.
How does this look?
Great.
Okay. I'm sorry. Does anyone want the subtitles?
No.
Okay, then I'll turn it off. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for coming to this meeting. I'm Stephen Emmerman. I'm the owner of Malach Consulting. Oops, let's back up a bit. Back. What is wrong here? I'll just go on. I'm going to be talking about potential impact of new development on flooding on James Island in Charleston, South Carolina. Just a few things to know about me. Main things are I was born in Charleston, South Carolina. I lived at 9 Devereaux Avenue in historic Charleston. This is on the left bank of the Ashley River. I have an MA in geophysics from Princeton University, PhD in geophysics from Cornell University. I was a professor of hydrology for 31 years. I've been involved in issues of hydrology and development for over 40 years. Okay, so I've been looking at two proposed developments called Central Park and Riverland Oaks. Both areas are currently forest and wetlands, including some grand oaks. Plan at Central Park is to convert 10.35 acres into 38 single-family lots. I would like to just get rid of this little box. So there we go. Okay. Plan at Riverland Oaks is to convert 28.6 acres into 146 townhomes. Now, I really was asking only one question in the study, and that is, are the proposed developments consistent with the Charleston stormwater regulations? That is, the regulations that govern the decisions of the Division of Stormwater Management. Okay, now I just want to explain one concept first. That's the idea of an extreme precipitation event. So when we talk about a 100-year storm, we mean a storm that has a 1% probability of occurrence or exceedance in any given year. A 25-year storm has a 4% probability of occurrence or exceedance in any given year. A 10-year storm has a 10% probability of occurrence or exceedance in any given year. And at this point, you should see what the pattern is. The main thing is that a 100-year storm does not mean a storm that comes around like clockwork once every 100 years. There actually is no such thing. But the advantage of this kind of terminology is that, for example, if you're told that there was a 100-year storm 3 months in a row, or a 500-year storm last year and the year before and this year, you should be a little suspicious of that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about two documents which are both called Stormwater Design Standards Manuals. There's a 2013 version, there's a 2020 version. The Central Park development is being evaluated according to the 2013 version. The Riverland Oaks development is being evaluated according to the 2020 version. These two documents are extremely similar, and actually they're identical in terms of what I have to say in this presentation. Just to emphasize this point, I'll be quoting the same information from both manuals. So both of these manuals have the concept of a special protection area. So 2013, flooding exists in many locations around the city where development densities have increased to the point that stormwater controls have become overwhelmed. In 2020, any development or redevelopment within or discharging to these special protection areas must comply with a more stringent set of design criteria. The city can designate any area as a special protection area. So we have the same concept in both manuals. Now, both of these proposed developments are in special protection areas. This has been acknowledged by the consultants for the developers of Central Park, Seaman Whiteside, and by consultants for the developers for Riverland Oaks, Hasiki Bell. Both of these should follow the requirements of a special protection area. Okay? So what is it that needs to be done that's special in a special protection area? For any new development, there's a maximum permissible peak discharge. That is peak flow rate of stormwater from those areas. In 2013, the post-development peak discharge rates are restricted to 1/2 the pre-development rates for the 2 and 10-year 24-hour storm event, or to the downstream system capacity, whichever is less. And note what I've put in boldface. 2020, for non-single family residence sites of 0.5 acres or more, the post-development peak discharge rates are restricted to 1/2 the pre-development rates for the 2-year and 10-year 24-hour storm events, again, or to the downstream system capacity, whichever is less. The important point here is in both manuals, the downstream system capacity sets a lower bound on the permissible peak discharge from a new development. Okay, so any proposal for a new development has to show that they meet this requirement, that their peak discharge will not exceed the downstream system capacity. Okay, so how would a developer or consultants for a developer, how would they go about demonstrating their compliance with this requirement? That is the non-exceedance of downstream system capacity. Okay, so these two conditions have to be met. The stormwater infrastructure must be known, and it must be in good condition. If you don't know what the stormwater infrastructure is, or it's not in good condition, if the pipes are all clogged, then of course you can't demonstrate anything. Now, our first point is that the stormwater infrastructure in this part of James Island is not known. This has been documented especially by James Mazik. He's a former Charleston police officer, a retired firefighter, now lives immediately downslope from the proposed Central Park development. If we look at the pair of photos on the left, James Mazik found a blocked 42-inch stormwater pipe. It was immediately below a manhole cover, so it could have been accessed by city workers. If we look at the pair of photos on the right, we see a 42-inch stormwater pipe that's completely sealed with large rocks, so no water can get into the pipe. If we look on the right, we see an adjacent open 48-inch stormwater pipe, and that's what an open pipe ought to look like. Now, the response from the city of Charleston is that, in fact, they do not keep records of alterations to stormwater infrastructure, and they had no knowledge of this sealed pipe. This was a communication April 28th of this year. From the records of the work we did to rehabilitate this system in 2016, it looks like the pipe must have been closed off before that. As a result, it would have been done before most of us working in stormwater engineering at the city and county were here. We are looking into if we have any records of what might have happened on this system, or if any of the longer tenured maintenance employees have any knowledge on this. And we will let you know if we find anything out. But in fact, the city of Charleston has no records as to how, who, why this 42-inch stormwater pipe was sealed off with rocks. Now, the important point is not what is the impact of having this pipe open or not, but if there is such a big change to the stormwater infrastructure for which there were no records, we could ask, but what are all of the other changes for which there are no records? We could ask, do we actually know anything about the actual state of the stormwater infrastructure? In addition, the stormwater infrastructure is in poor condition. Much of this was also documented by James Mazik. He was not the only one. He has provided photos of drainage channels that are nearly full with mud, with vegetation, with wooded debris, with trash, with shopping carts. These are not the only examples. I was recently provided with photos of stormwater pipes that were almost completely filled with mud, 42-inch pipes, some nearly full with mud. These kinds of channels and pipes are not conveying any stormwater. They might as well not even exist. Now, since the stormwater infrastructure seemed to be unknown and seemed to be in such poor condition when it actually was known, what I decided to do was to assess the downstream system capacity based upon its actual performance. That is, when you have rainfall events of various amounts, do you or do you not have flooding? So how much rainfall is required to cause flooding? I documented 22 flooding events on James Island in the last 5 years. One thing I want to draw your attention to is the return periods of some of these rainfall events, because people often talk about the 1,000-year flood, the 100-year flood, the 500-year flood. In fact, the 3 most recent hurricanes, which caused very massive flooding, were not even all that rare. Hurricane Joaquin was a 40-year storm. Hurricane Matthew was a 29-year storm. Hurricane Irma was only a 10-year storm. It doesn't mean that these storms do not have greater return periods in other places, but on James Island, they were actually not such major events. The truth is that the residents of James Island have no idea the kind of massive flooding that would actually result from a real 100-year flood, certainly from a 500-year flood. Okay, it would be flooding considerably more massive than occurred during these 3 most recent hurricanes. Now, let's look at 2 pairs of graphs, because what I'm doing now is I'm asking, does flooding occur or not occur depending upon how much rain fell or what was the return period of the storm? If we look at the diagram on the left, we see that if there's a storm with a return period greater than 4.9 years, about 5 years, there's a 100% probability of flooding. That is, flooding is inevitable with any storm more rare than a 5-year event. What if we look at storms with a return period greater than 1 year? Now, a 1-year storm has a 100% probability of exceedance in any given year. So a 1-year storm is essentially the inevitable storm. If you have that inevitable storm, there's a 59% probability of flooding. Now, if we look at the diagram on the right, now I'm comparing the incidence of flooding with the amount of rainfall in 24 hours. If there's more than 5.53 inches of rainfall, the probability of flooding is 100%. That is, it's inevitable. If you have more than 2.5 inches of rainfall, the probability of flooding is 50%. That is, flooding is expected. Now, if you have more than 0.53 inches of rain in 24 hours, half an inch of rain in 24 hours, the probability of flooding is 10%. Okay? In other words, we could say that the stormwater system cannot reliably accommodate more than half of an inch of rain in 24 hours. Now, that is the real downstream system capacity. It is that very low flow rate that would correspond to only half an inch of rain in 24 hours. And that should be the maximum permissible peak discharge from any new development. Okay? Now, the important point is that the City of Charleston has not required developers to in any way take into account this actual downstream system capacity in violation of city stormwater regulations. And in fact, this whole concept of downwater system capacity is not mentioned anywhere in the plans provided by the consultants for the developers for either Central Park or Riverland Oaks. It has not been provided by the developers. It has not been demanded by the City of Charleston. Now, the great irony here is that there's been an ongoing drainage study in that exact neighborhood of the proposed developments. If you look on the left, this is right off the City of Charleston website, Central Park Wallenbach Creek Watershed Master Plan Drainage Study, started in 2019. The city and Charleston County are partnering on this project to inventory all the drainage features of this basin, create a model, and recommend any maintenance and infrastructure improvements. A basin-wide stormwater drainage model is needed to determine the level of service for and condition of the existing system, as well as the ability to assess the impacts of development on the existing system. Suggested possible drainage improvements, as well as design recommendations and standards for future development within the watershed, will be included in the final plan. Fantastic. I'm all in favor of this kind of study. The problem I have is with fast-tracking developments in advance of receiving this study. And I'm summarizing on the right. Any reasonable person would see something wrong with making decisions regarding stormwater permits in advance of the completion of a study that would provide a rational basis for making a decision about those permits. And now I'm summarizing my recommendations. First, comply with the City of Charleston Stormwater Design Standards Manual. Now, that should be a no-brainer. I probably should call this step 0. I'm just saying the City of Charleston should follow the law. Number 2, complete the ongoing drainage study of the Central Park Wallenbach Creek watershed. But that's not the end of it. Step 3, evaluate the recommendations of the drainage study. Step 4, implement the recommendations of the drainage study as appropriate. Step 5, verify that implementation of the recommendations has significantly improved the flooding situation on James Island. Now, if there's been no improvement in the flooding situation, we should go back to steps 2 and 3. If there has been improvement, well, yes, now we're ready for step 7. That is, consider the possibility of new developments, but still in compliance with the City of Charleston Stormwater Design Standards Manuals. That is, require new developments to show that the peak discharge from those developments will not exceed the downstream system capacity. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Theodosia,
Hear me?
are you ready for me?
I am, but can you hear me?
I hear you. Not now.
Harriet.
Okay. My name is Harriet Revis, and I'm president of the Marlboro Neighborhood Association. And Dr. Emmerman, we'd like to thank you once again for a wonderful presentation. And also we'd like to thank members from the city, county, and town of James Island who are joining us today. Based on what you've seen, the neighborhoods in the Central Park Basin would like to ask two things of council members. The first thing is we would like for you to ensure that the city uses the strict interpretation of the stormwater manual guidelines when reviewing these two projects. And second, and really, really important, we would like for you to commit to securing a meeting date for Matt Fountain, Kenzie Holton in the city, and Chris Wanamaker from the county to meet via a Zoom call with Dr. Emmerman to go over questions that Dr. Emmerman has already submitted to Matt Fountain. There needs to be a thorough discussion between Matt, Kenzie, Chris, and Dr. Emmerman about the stormwater guidelines, and we need you to help us make that happen. So back to you, Theodosia.
Thank you, Harriet. That was a great summary of what we're asking as residents of city and county officials. So at this point, we would like to hear from city and county officials as to how we can make this happen. This meeting seems to be really important in terms of getting everybody on the same page, understanding what's going on, and getting an understanding of the results of this study. So can someone speak to that? I know we've got several people from the county, from the city, and we have Carter McMillan from the county. If you all could address that, that would be great. And again, we're going to try to keep people to 2 minutes if we can, so we don't get too far off track. And then we will open it to questions you may have about the report. Dudley?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think we can commit to the three requests that Dr. Revis just articulated. I think that's a reasonable request, actually, because it's kind of obvious that we need to bring city staff in to take a look and evaluate Dr. Emmerman's study, recommendations, et cetera, et cetera. So I do not think that that's going to be a problem. In fact, I think that our staff would welcome such a discussion, given the kind of information that has been revealed. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. And I'm sure that my colleagues, other council members that are here, would concur with that at a minimum, we can do 1, 2, and 3 and make it happen.
Okay, could we hear from maybe Ross Appel?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Emmerman, for that presentation. This is very important and complicated information on an issue that, of course, is on everybody's front burner these days. You know, I tend to agree. I think that anytime you have the opportunity for more information to be brought to bear on a important issue, it's something that can be offered to the city. And this is a specific development that's in the development review process. I know that the Central Park development is actually in litigation right now, and I just say that I don't want to put an asterisk in here, but whether and to what extent the staff can act and do certain things will all be have to be decided by the mayor's office and our legal department and things of that nature. But in concept, I don't have a problem with what's being presented. I think it's great to have different voices and more information brought to bear. I just want to that's the lawyer in me talking. I just want to caveat that because I don't want to make any commitments or representations that I can't back up. And this is something I've shared with several of the folks that have brought various flooding concerns to my attention, not just on James Island, but elsewhere. As a council, we're the legislative body of the city of Charleston. We don't have a vote on the Central Park development. We don't have a vote on the Riverland Oaks development. We pass ordinances, zoning ordinances. We pass, stormwater manuals that get implemented and administered by professionals in our staff. And it's not typically the case that we get involved in these highly technical matters. I'm not a stormwater engineer. These are extremely complicated and technical matters. So, but as a council member, we owe an obligation to our constituents to raise the profile of issues of public concern and bring matters to the administration and the staff's attention as appropriate. And I'll commit to that. So.
Okay, time. I'm gonna call time on you, but thank you so much. I guess, Ross, one of the things we're really thinking is, can we commit? Can we have this meeting? That's really key. Dr. Emmerman has already reached out to Matt Fountain and has gotten short responses, but a conversation on Zoom where they can be face to face and go back and forth with some of the information so that Dr. Emmerman can then, we can work with Dr. Emmerman who can explain it to us. We're under the same problem you are. We are not experts in these areas. We're not engineers. And we too have to depend on these, the experts on it. So that's what we're asking, is a commitment from the city council today to say, yes, we can set up a meeting. Yes, that can happen between our stormwater people in the county and the city and Dr. Emmerman. So are you saying then, Ross, that you would support that meeting?
I think we can make the request with just the understanding that I can't force Matt Fountain to do anything. Right. We can make requests, we can make proposals, but at the end of the day, there's some other folks that have to make that ultimate decision.
Okay, Carol Jackson, what about you? How do you think we might get this meeting to happen in reality? You need to unmute yourself. Can you unmute yourself? We didn't hear that. Carol Jackson, is there a way that you can unmute yourself? I guess not.
If I can just follow up.
Yes, please.
Because I think that Councilman Appel said something that I think we need to pay pretty close attention to. But I'd also like to make sure that everyone on this call knows, okay, that without the efforts of Dr. Revis and I, starting back in 2014, we may not even be on this conversation because we had to get the $400,000 allocated to get the study started. With that, however, I think that if we are involved in litigation, okay, even if we have a meeting, it may restrict what we can and what we cannot say, okay? So, and I think that it was very important, and thanks for the lawyer in Councilman Appel, because he's absolutely right. Yes, I think that we may be able to commit to a meeting, but the substance of that meeting could be questioned based upon how much we can and cannot say, given the fact that we are involved in litigation. So I don't want to say to people that we'll have a meeting and we're going to discuss X, Y, Z. We don't know. Okay, we're going to have to talk to our legal department as well. And thanks for that, Councilman Appel.
Yeah. Okay. Understood. We realize that there is limited ability to do that kind of thing when you are under litigation, as I'm sure you are, but we do feel like it's really important for people to sit down at the table who can speak the same language and can sort of give that those explanations. So do we, at this point, can we assume that you three, Carol, Dudley, and Ross, could actually carry this request forward for us, or is there a better way? Should we send a letter?
I don't see why a letter is necessary. I think that the three council members, in conjunction with our legal department and our stormwater department, can determine whether or not we can or cannot have the meeting. I'm sure we can have the meeting. It's just whether
Right.
we will be able to say. So I don't think there needs to be a formal request. I do think that the three of us, I mean, it is my district, most of it.
Right, right.
Having a conversation with staff, as well as our legal department, to determine not if, but probably when we can have some kind of discussion
Right.
on the matter.
And I guess we would, okay, Carol, do you want to speak? Go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt Councilmember Gregory. I got dumped out of the Zoom meeting. I couldn't get back on. I guess you could still see me, but I couldn't see
We could, yeah.
or answer.
Okay.
I agree with both my colleagues. I do feel like these are, that this is the right request to make of us. I personally want to apologize for all of the misunderstanding that I had from the messages and the many texts I think that I got last week. I thought your request was of a different nature, and it wasn't until Sunday morning, I think, when I finally saw the letter that details the questions that now you're asking us to require of Matt Fountain and Kinsey Holton. So I feel like we've been around the bush for a while, but I do agree, and we've had the opportunity to check in with Matt, and unless Kinsey has some conflicts between now and the end of the week or the first of Monday, they do plan on putting their heads together and coming up with the actual responses to the specific questions that Dr. Emmerman repeated in the letter, and I think put in sort of bullet language to us today. So, but the legal question is important and serious, and none of us can answer that sufficiently. The city has an outside counsel, as some of you know, and I do think that we have to put that condition on our answer today.
And just want to say too, I think we've also had, the whole idea that the city is not complying with their own stormwater manual, according to the results that we have seen. And that seems to me too to be a legal issue for residents to say to their city, you're not doing your job, you're not following the manual. The manual's our contract that says this is the way we'll do business. So I'm sure the legal people at the city will want to think about that as well.
Theodosia,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, please.
I think it's important that Carter McMillan here is here.
Yeah.
I feel very concerned that the city is taking all the heat on this, okay? But I witnessed Chris Wanamaker say that there was an adequate pipe here in the intake of that development, which after Chris Wanamaker testified that at a TRC meeting, okay, I hired a surveyor to rebut what he said, and I took that report to council, and Jenny Honeycutt had them come out here and make it right and fix the culvert. Okay, my background picture is that culvert that is still covered in mud, okay? Herb Sass told me that what we've been through in our area by the county, and he is a swing vote on county council, is cruel and unusual punishment. So, I mean, it's not just the city here. The city was relying on what Matt Fountain told them and testified in a TRC meeting. So I'm so happy that Harriet and you are asking for Dr. Emmerman to meet with all three of those engineers, because I think the city's trying to do the right thing here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, Carter, could you speak to the county, and would that be an option to get Chris Wanamaker in on that conversation?
Carter, I'll speak for you.
Oh, thank you. Could you introduce yourself? I saw your name, but I didn't know who you were.
This is Wes Linker, the technical programs manager for Charles County Public Works. Stormwater is one of my departments.
Okay.
I'm new to the county and I'm new to this position, but we do have some work that we are working with the city on right now, the Central Park drainage area. We have two tasks that we are undertaking right now, obtaining some easements along Hal and Stephan, and then the recent CTC funding for the Central Park Drainage Improvement Project. We have been working with Matt tremendously we've been working with Matt for the last few months on this area, and we will attend a meeting in support of Matt. If Matt and Kinsey do meet with Mr. Emmer, we will also meet.
Great. That would be great, because it is important to get all on the table together, everybody in one room with the conversation. I think that sounds great, and it sounds like that will help it happen sooner rather than later. Carol mentioned that they would be writing a response to Dr. Emmerman's questions in writing, but we would like to see a meeting in the next 2 weeks. Is that reasonable? Or the next week? I don't know what's reasonable for the calendars.
I don't know either.
I don't
Okay.
either. I don't know.
We definitely have to ask that
Thea-
question.
Theodosia,
Yes?
this is Harriet. I would like to have Councilman Gregory maybe talk to Matt Fountain, since basically the project that is most ready to go would be the Central Park project, and it's the most crucial time element, and have Councilman Gregory meet with Matt and see if he can arrange this Zoom meeting, and then to get back to us about that. And maybe just have one point person talking to Matt so that we could get an answer.
And Harriet, would you mind being our point person to work with Councilman Gregory on that, to if you don't hear from him, to poke him a little? Is that all right, Councilman Gregory?
Trust me that she knows how to do that.
She does. She's very good at that. That's why I asked if she would do it. She's very good at that.
I will definitely do it.
Yes. And we will poke at Harriet to say, have you heard? Have you heard yet? Are there questions? I know that I've seen Steve's presentation. I've read his 68-page report. It does help to see it several times, because it starts to kind of sink in some of the things that he brings up, and I start to understand it a little better every time. But are there questions that anyone has of Dr. Emmerman, the council people, particularly residents? Let's hold our questions, but if any council people have questions, we would really give you all this opportunity, and again, hold it to about 2 minutes.
I have one question that really doesn't pertain just to the basin, unless I've misunderstood what I heard, and I didn't see it in the writing. I have read the 68-page report, and I've read the first memo. I think it was dated August 7th that Dr. Emmerman sent, and then the letter that he wrote to Betsy LaForce to pass on to you all, dated August 10th. So those are the documents that I've read myself. And I understand the challenge to the downstream capacity as the lower of the numbers that should be used in the modeling in evaluating the Central Park Crescent design under the 2013 manual. And so is that the only place where you are making the more generalized comment that the city is not following its own manual? Because if there are other instances of that, then I think we should know all of those critiques that we've not been presented with. But that's my understanding of not following the manual. I am concerned in terms of, just what gets posted on social media or regular media, that kind of language that the city does not follow its own manual is a pretty serious critique. And so I would really like to understand the basis of that statement compared to we need to be looking at the downstream capacity, because both versions of the manual start there as the basis of modeling existing conditions.
Steve, could you answer that question for her?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch what the question was. I think I understood what you said, but I didn't catch what you were asking me.
My question is, I've now heard the generalized phrase that the city is not following its own manual standards
Right,
in evaluating stormwater management design.
right.
And the question of you, Dr. Emmerman, is that the interpretation based on the fact that you would say we didn't use the downstream capacity in modeling and requiring that factor to be used as the basis of the modeling of existing conditions for the crescent? Or are you saying there are other examples that you can point to where the city has not followed its own manual, that you're adding to that list of not following our manual?
Okay, now I understand. Okay. What you just mentioned is the most important one. There is another example that's given in my report, but it's a little more difficult to explain.
Can you tell me the page of it, and I'll be happy to reread it and point it out to Mr. Fountain.
Okay. Well, okay.
You can send that along to Ms. LaForce.
I'm getting there. Okay. Okay. So let me just summarize. The most important thing of all is that in the special protection areas, the peak discharge cannot exceed the downstream stormwater capacity, the downstream system capacity. Okay. Now, the downstream system capacity means the actual system capacity. It doesn't mean a design capacity or a hypothetical capacity. That whole concept of downstream system capacity was not considered anywhere in any of the reports from the developers. Okay? Even so, everything that came from the developers concerned kind of a hypothetical or design infrastructure and did not in any way address what actually exists. What the manual says is that the peak discharge cannot exceed the downstream system capacity, which of course means the actual downstream system capacity. Okay? That's the most important thing of all.
Okay, thank you.
I think Ross also had a question.
Yeah, I've got a follow-up question on that because I think at the this may turn on an interpretive question regarding our language in that 2013 stormwater manual. You referred to the requirement that the actual downstream conditions be analyzed as opposed to the modeled conditions. And what I'm trying to understand is perhaps this could be, and again, I'm not a stormwater engineer. I have no idea about the ins and outs of this at the granular level, but how would you go about ascertaining what the actual condition is given the fluctuations we have with maintenance, tides, things of that nature? Like for example, the Greenway over in the West Ashley portion of my district, I got the ditches along the Greenway along Burns Downs and Old Windermere excavated over the last several months. So the capacity now is different than it was 2 months ago. And one thing we might be able to talk about a little bit later is some of the bigger picture issues here beyond two specific developments. But I mean, it occurs to me that the actual conditions are a moving target, and perhaps that's why models are used in this line of work. So I guess my question to you is, in the actual field of stormwater management, the administration of stormwater regulations around the country, do departments actually like, how are actual conditions approached in the industry, so to speak?
Okay. These are great questions. Okay. First of all of this is what should be done in the ongoing drainage study. I haven't seen that study, so I don't know. Okay, but I'm telling you what they should be doing. Okay. So the first thing is you would do the best you could first to go through historical records and then to actually visit the stormwater infrastructure and look at what's there, what's not there, what's missing, what's blocked. Okay. And at some point there would be a limit to how much you could do that. Okay. There could be a lack of resources, or you could just maybe just not have access to certain parts of the infrastructure. Okay. And now you have a model of infrastructure based upon historical records plus what you actually visited and measured. Okay. And you might wonder, is this model good enough? Okay. So now you do what's called verification of the model. Okay. So you would take a past rainfall event, like the April 23rd, 2020 rain bomb. Okay. That would be an input to the model, and the model would make predictions. It would say certain streets should have been flooded for this amount of time. You should have watermarks of this height. These neighborhoods should have been flooded. And you compare that with what actually happened. Okay? If there's a match, well, that's great. You've got a pretty good model. But usually the match is kind of there, but not really. Okay? So then you pay attention to the parts of the infrastructure that you couldn't measure, and you make adjustments to them in order to make your predictions then match what actually happened. And that's called calibration of the model. Okay? Now, all of this sounds like a lot of work, but the truth is that's what engineers actually do when they actually care whether the model is correct. Okay? The stormwater model doesn't use phrases like actual downstream stormwater capacity instead of hypothetical, because that's what we call a no-brainer. Okay, it's only the actual downstream capacity that matters. Okay, now you made a very good point about the condition of the channels. Okay, now it's filled with mud, now it's cleaned out, now it's filled with mud again. Okay, now the appropriate approach would be to consider what is the typical condition of that stormwater infrastructure. Not assume that the infrastructure will always be in its ideal condition, but what would be typical. Okay, and you might want to consider a range then, okay, from an ideal condition, everything cleaned, to what everything will look like before it's cleaned. So that's going to give you kind of a range of uncertainty, okay? But within the industry, to simply take designs and in no way verify what actually is occurring in reality, that is not typical in the industry. Okay, did that make sense what I said?
Oh, it definitely did. And I recall, in some of my conversations with Matt over the last several months, and this may be in reference to some of the improvements in the new manual, but he kept talking about how, the developer's obligation was to bring the studying and the modeling to the technical review process,
right?
Number one. And then number two, as we have these various basin studies like the Central Park and Wamba Basin study performed, that sort of provides a contextual and scientific backdrop to the evaluation of these various issues. So we're not operating in an information vacuum, so to speak. So I think that that's great, and we do have a lot of these positive measures in the works. These studies, I've seen in other parts of the city, you do the basin-wide study, you identify the most efficient and effective improvements. We just did that in the Doo-Wop Basin study. We're hopefully getting that process underway in the South Windermere Basin. So it seems like we're moving in a positive direction, and frankly, a lot of this work should have been done a long, long time ago.
Well, I certainly agree with what you just said.
Yeah. Are there others who have questions about the study, these are great questions, and they're questions we've asked Dr. Emmerman as well in our meetings with them. It's hard to understand everything. So Carter McMillan, I know you're from the county. Oh, and we did have, and then, so I guess, did you have a comment or a question that you might want to share? I know we just heard from Wesley, but I just wondered if you might have a question or a comment, Carter. Or maybe we've lost you. That may have happened. Well, I think, we're at 5 o'clock on my computer anyway. My phone is a little slower, but just appreciate so much. Appreciate you, Garrett, for being here from the town of James Island. I know that's not necessarily part of some of what you do, and the permitting and so forth, but it's your island and we're all on it together. So we appreciate you being here. So we will look forward to the time when Harriet and Councilman Gregory can set up and work with Matt and with also with Wesley Blinker to get that meeting set up for city and county. That would be fabulous. That's the timer. It's time to go. So thank you, and we'll sign off here, but thank you very much.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yes, thank y'all.
Bye.
Yeah, enjoyed it. Thank y'all very much.
Appreciate your comments.
Thank you for being here.
Yes.
Awesome.
All right, I'll get on it.
Okay.
Okay, talk to you in a little while. Bye-bye.